Okay, so we're going to talk about how we add decimals. So there's a few simple steps that we're going to follow. So step one, we are going to line up our decimal. When we line up the decimal, we are actually lining up our place values. So we're putting our ones with our ones, our tenths with our tenths, etc. So by lining up the decimal, we are saying the numbers above and below each other have the same value. So if we do not line up the decimals, we could be saying that like a 1 is the same thing as a tenth, which would mean that a dollar bill is the same thing as a dime. And that's not the case, right? So we can't line up our numbers without lining up our decimal point. So after we do that, our second step is we fill in missing place values with zeros. So we want to have numbers to add with each other. So anywhere that we have a missing spot, we are going to add in a 0. So we have something to add with. And then finally, our third step is to add like normal. So we line up our place values, we bring our place values straight down, we fill in missing zeros, and we add like normal. So what does this look like? So let's look at an example. So we have 3 5/10 plus 2 25/100. So the very first thing I want to do is I want to write my top number. So I'm going to write the 3 5/10. I'm going to immediately put the decimal directly below it. And I'm going to fill in these numbers around it. So the 2 is going to go under the 3 because it's the left of the decimal. The 25 is going to go to the right of my decimal. And then I'm going to say that this is an addition problem. I have one spot missing in my first number. So the only number I can put there that represents nothing is a 0. And that doesn't change the fact that this was a 3 5/10. Because 3 5/10 is the exact same thing as 3 50/100. Now, we drop our zeros, so then our decimals are still all lined up. We want our decimals to be lined up in the problem and the answer. Then we add as if the decimal is not even there. So 0 plus 5 is 5. 5 plus 2 is 7. 3 plus 2 is 5. So then our total is 5 75/100. Let's try another one. So let's say I have 12 3/10 or 300. I apologize, 12 300 plus 16 1/10. The very first thing is I'm going to put the top number on top. I'm going to put the decimal directly below the other decimal and fill in my numbers around it. So the 16 is to the left of my decimal, so it still has to be to the left. The 1 is one spot to the right, so it's going to go below my 0. I'm going to say this is an addition problem. And I have a missing spot. So I'm going to add my 0, drop my decimal into my answer, and add like normal. 3 plus 0 is 3. 0 plus 1 is 1. 2 plus 6 is 8. 1 plus 1 is 2. So your total is 28 13/100. So not all numbers have decimals. So what happens when I have a number, say 54 plus 6 5/10? One of my numbers has a decimal. The other one doesn't. So you still have to line up your decimal. All numbers have decimals. We just don't write them sometimes. So if we have a whole number that doesn't have anything in the decimal places, typically we just leave it off. But it is always really there. So on 54, I'm able to add a decimal at the end of the number. That is the only place that I can add a decimal and keep that saying 54. Because if I added a decimal between the 5 and the 4, it changes it to 5 4/10. If I put it in the front, it changes it to 54 hundredths. So the only place where I can add a decimal and keep it being a 54 is at the end. So I'm going to put the top number. I'm going to have a decimal, and we can always add zeros after our decimal. And I still have not changed anything. So this still just says 54. I'm going to put my decimal directly below the other decimal and fill in the numbers around it. So this 6 is on the left-hand side of my decimal. The 5 is on the right. I'm going to say this is an addition problem. And I'm able to put a 0 under the 5 if I want. When it's on the left-hand side of the decimal, you really don't have to put a 0. But if it's on the right-hand side of the decimal, you have to fill in your zeros. I'm going to put my decimal directly into my answer. And then I'm going to add. 0 plus 5 is 5. 6 plus 4 is 10. So I'm going to put a 0, carry my 1. 5 plus 1 is 6. So my answer is 60 5/10.